Of Mica Miller has gained a lot of attention recently. Mica Miller, age 30, died in a North Carolina national forest, and although the medical examiner did not rule her death a homicide, her family believes there is more to the story. They're calling for a more thorough investigation as more details about John Paul Miller, her estranged husband, come to light. Mica Miller's pastor husband, John Paul, threatened to show up at her sister's house, quote, armed and ready, while demanding to see his wife during a 2022 altercation, as disturbing texts have revealed. The disturbing messages posted online show Miller, 44, was undeterred by his sister-in-law's objections, challenging her to, quote, call the cops. This case has brought up issues surrounding spousal and coercive control and how these factors may have contributed to Mica's death. My guest today is Sarah A. Ford. She is a South Carolina victims' rights attorney and hosts the podcast Stepping Towards Justice. I'm Collier Landry. Let's get into it.
Testimony continued today in the most notorious criminal trial in Richland County history. Dr. John Boyle is accused of killing his wife, Noreen.
The 12-year-old son finally took the stand.
As I heard a scream, I heard a thud. It was about this loud.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
I decided at an early age that our trauma should not be what defines us. It's what we choose to do with it that does. I'm here to offer my unique perspective on mental health, true crime, society, and popular culture, and albeit with a slight sense of humor. I'm Collier Landry, and welcome to my show. Mover Nation, wherever you may be and however you may be listening or watching, thanks for making me a part of your day. This program wouldn't be what it is without you guys, so thank you for tuning in. If you would like to financially support the show, there are links to that stuff in the show notes and description of today's episode. Some housekeeping notes for all our Patreon and YouTube members. Our next AV Club is coming up this Sunday, May 19th at 8 p.m. Eastern. We will watch the first episode of the second season of the new HBO series, The Jinx. There's a part 2 almost 10 years later. First episode of the second season is called Why Are You Still Here? It is, if you guys saw the first season of The Jinx, it was amazing. And this second season does not look like it's going to disappoint. If you are a paid member of the Patreon or the YouTube membership, is open to members at the $7 level and higher. I hope to see all of you there. Also, just note that you do have to be a member of the HBO Max or Max platform. I need to say that for legal purposes. Take that for however you wish, but we will still stream the episode. So if you can join, please do. Now let's get into today's episode. So in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, there was an unexpected twist in the death of a South Carolina pastor's wife after the sheriff announced that the FBI and U.S. attorney are helping in the Mica Miller investigation. The 30-year-old woman was found dead in April. And however, investigators are saying that she called 911 moments before she was found dead at a state park in North Carolina, which was about an hour north of where she lived in Myrtle Beach. Mica's death came just days after she told a police officer she was, quote, scared for her life after finding a GPS tracker on her car and a razor blade in her tire. She and her husband, John Paul Miller, were also in the process of separating. He was a pastor at a local church, but has since been released from his duties. This case has brought up a lot of issues surrounding spousal abuse and coercive control and how these factors may have contributed to Mica's death. And it's I've seen a lot of the videos. We're going to play some of them during the episode. It's bad. It's bad. And she, really wanted to share this with the world to let other women know that they are not alone. It's just unfortunate that she felt the need to do what she did with her life. So, as you know, YouTube, we got to watch what we say. But anyways, I'm pleased to welcome my guest. So my guest is Sarah A. Ford. She is a victims' rights attorney from South Carolina, where she was born and raised. She is a former public defender of 2 years and a prosecutor of 8 years, where she focused on crimes against women and children. Sarah has been the legal director at the South Carolina Victims Assistance Network since 2017. She trains folks across South Carolina and nationally on victims' rights, domestic violence, and sexual assault, and best practices on victim-centered investigations and prosecutions, amongst other topics. She is also the host of the Stepping Toward Justice podcast with Sarah A. Ford. I am pleased to welcome to the program Sarah A. Ford. Sarah, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
You are welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry I got to tiptoe around the language with YouTube. They have that. It's. I think they're trying to change that, but it is very aggravating because what we are talking about today is something that is very serious in nature. That awareness needs to be raised, and I really feel like you know, with the loss of this young woman's life, she tried her best in the very end of her life to raise so much awareness about what she was going through and be so transparent. There's a litany of Facebook messages and videos on TikTok and things of that nature. And she really tried to let people know what she was going through and let them know that they're not alone. So hopefully her death was not in vain. It's just unfortunate that it had to end how it did,
Absolutely. I think that the conversation that has been started here in South Carolina and nationally about this case is drawing so much attention to domestic violence. And, so often people think that domestic violence is about, hiding bruises, but there's so much more that goes into domestic violence and domestic violence relationships and breaking free from that relationship and moving forward and how difficult that can be. This is a tragic loss for those who loved Mica and her family. This certainly is something that I think is already bringing much needed attention and awareness to an incredibly important issue.
Absolutely. And just even, I'm going to play some of the videos. I'm going to show the police report that was filed literally 3 days when she found the tracker. She went to the Honda dealership and was freaked out. Then he shows up and starts, threatening to post things on social media. It's just a really, really unfortunate scenario. And that's Mica in the shot there. And I'm calling it the mystery because I think really there's so much, speculation, and I think it gets very sticky, and you're an attorney, so you can comment on this. How does something, and we're going to go through the videos and we're going to go through the text messages, but just in a nutshell, when people are trying to reconcile this, like how does this work in a situation where you have a husband who is, he has denied, of course, any wrongdoing through his legal counsel. But how liable is someone like this in driving another person to this extreme where they feel that the only way out is to take their own life, to escape this type of abuse and control?
I think in South Carolina, we have not seen it as much as I've seen on a national level, where there is certainly there have been multiple cases, particularly with teenagers being texted and bullied into taking their own life. So I think that there is a national movement in the law enforcement and legal community to look at how that affects the actions of individuals who may take their own life, and the liability of individuals who have a part in that. And I say that from the criminal perspective because certainly the criminal allegations, there has to be probable cause for that, meaning that, did a crime occur? Is this actually a crime? And do we think that this person actually had something to do with that? But that's just the tip of the iceberg. When they are prosecuting that case, they've got to be able to prove that through evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, that's the criminal aspect. But of course, we also look with victims. I'm a victims' rights lawyer. It's not only in criminal court, we can also look for some justice in the civil arena. And that the burden of proof in the civil courts is by preponderance of the evidence. So it's kind of that just ever so slightly tipping those scales. So you've probably, we're aware of wrongful death suits and things like that, certainly with the O.J. Simpson case and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
So there are different ways that folks can pursue justice. But I'm very interested to see, especially because the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI are now involved over the last few days, it appears, and seeing what sort of case they may be looking to investigate. What are they looking to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just a new development because this happened, obviously on April 30th. So it's a couple weeks ago. But now there seems to be this there's renewed interest. A lot of it I feel like is due to maybe pressures of the community on local law enforcement to say that we're not going to stand for this. Because you can see again the Facebook messages, the history on social media, and sort of the nature. And I don't know, obviously I'm not involved in the situation and I'm just speculating based upon what I've read, but there is a lot of talk that she had been groomed by her husband, that she had been in the church, Solid Rock Church, I think is what it's called, maybe. And I've been to Myrtle Beach. I don't remember when I was in Myrtle Beach going to church or that being a priority while I was in Myrtle Beach.
The dirty Myrtle, yeah.
I think the church that I went to was Mother Fletcher's, if it's still there. that was
A different sort of environment, perhaps.
Yeah, that was maybe like not the holiest of environments. But that is so when I hear Myrtle Beach, I think of very good times. But
Yeah.
there's this Solid Rock Church, which apparently she had been a member of since she was very young. And he was, he's 43, she's 30. It's a 13-year difference. And that's a pretty big age gap nowadays. And if she was in fact sort of groomed, and I don't know if she was underage when she was groomed or anything like that, but again, his hooks were into her very deeply. Do you know anything about that?
I've seen different things. A lot of things have been on X now. I'm still call it Twitter, but
social media. I have no idea. It seems so.
I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say.
Twitter. Now we have to say two things.
A lot of things on social media that say that she was 15 apparently when she met him, and I think she became married to another individual at 18, got divorced at 21, and then became, it appears, in a serious relationship with her now husband, her estranged husband, her ex-husband. And he had been married to someone else during that time period. I think she was a babysitter, perhaps, during that time. But I've seen a lot of different things, and that's certainly concerning when you have an adult in an authority figure, particularly a pastor of a church, having a relationship with a young woman, whether she was 15 or 20. If he's 35 and he's a pastor of a large church, and that's anytime that there's an imbalance of power in a relationship, that always gives me pause and causes some concern, because you worry about the individual with the lesser power in that dynamic. Are they being coerced? Are they being controlled? How are they being controlled? And it's absolutely a very valid concern in a situation like this, because then you've got the whole element of, their religion adding to that. Yeah. And some of the sermons that I've just seen pieces of are very troubling. So it brings a lot of questions, and it seems like we don't have a lot of answers as to exactly what went on. But we certainly can see through these latest, looks like TikToks that he's posted as of yesterday and today, that are just, I described it as unhinged behavior.
Yes. He, and we're going to play his bizarre video at her memorial that he did, where he was talking about raising her from the dead and seeing her at the mall. And it was, just very, very bizarre behavior, to say the least. And we're going to get into that. And of course, the text messages, which obviously involve threats of a firearm. Mica's father has now come out and said that she had purchased, the firearm that was used in her death, that she had purchased a firearm to protect herself because she was afraid of her life. He had supposedly purchased 6 firearms, and she had felt threatened based upon the sort of going back and forth, the go-between between them and her sister. And, it's a mess, right? So let me pull this up. And again, this comes courtesy of News Nation and of Daily Mail UK. Let's see here. The tech gods are going to smile upon us.
Fingers crossed.
So this is actually the the complaint that was filed with the police. I'll add this actually up here now. This is with the city of Myrtle Beach. This is the police report that was made at the Honda dealership, I believe, the day of. But let's play this video. And law enforcement is actually here in this video.
Right.
And he just comes out of nowhere unhinged.
Walk away.
I'll show you the pictures.
Do you want to go to jail?
They'll be on Facebook in a few hours.
Alrighty, you'll be in jail in a few hours.
You know, again, very disturbing.
Walk away.
I'll show you the pictures.
Do you want to go to jail?
They'll be on Facebook in a few hours.
Alrighty, you'll be in jail in a few hours. Walk away.
So again, he's, making, she's found this tracker. She's found this razor blade. She's there going to get her tire fixed. She calls law enforcement and files this complaint because she had just, I believe, served him with divorce papers or maybe separation papers. I mean, I don't know. I've never been married, so I don't know how it works. But filed for separation or what have you. She wanted to terminate the marriage. and he, of course, this is what caused him to become unhinged, which apparently the backstory is that he himself had marital indiscretions as well that had led her to want to file for divorce. Now, for me, looking at this, and I live in California, which is things are a lot different over here, I'd say. But is this common behavior for? I mean, because if I see the police, I kind of would walk away rather quickly and be like, okay, I'm not going to sit here and raise a scene. How does that work? Do you see this a lot with maybe abusers who are, just unhinged and don't care if law enforcement's there or not, and will just be unhinged?
Oh, absolutely. I think one thing that we're seeing here is that he thinks he's in charge. He's in control. Doesn't matter who you call. He's going to still, track her, be where she's at, put photos of her, on the internet, whatever it is that he wants to do. He doesn't fear, and you can see that in the video, he doesn't fear law enforcement. And that's a very common feature in dealing with abusers and people who commit acts of domestic violence. South Carolina is one of the top in the nation for women who are murdered by their spouses. We have a terrible history of domestic violence being a huge, huge issue in South Carolina. And to see that he, doesn't care, shows up, law enforcement doesn't matter to him, that's unfortunately very common. And I'm an attorney. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist, but he certainly is portraying a lot of the personality traits that are very concerning when dealing with abusers and people who tend to abuse others through their power, control, even in religious settings as well. Really some questionable traits there.
Absolutely. And I saw this a lot in my own personal life with my father, and which ended up in the tragedy of my mother being murdered. But I say on this program all the time, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not in law enforcement, I'm just a guy who's been through a lot of shit. So I mean, I think we can recognize it as like you have plenty of experience to assess this and go, you know what? I don't think that this behavior, I think this behavior is controlling and manipulative, and whether you want to call it narcissism, whether you want to call it psychopathy, right, something worse, he just doesn't care. He needs to be in control all of the time. Right. And as we're going to get into these text messages here in a second, you can see that, and just the threats. And even when he's threatened with law enforcement, the cops are coming, I don't care, bring it, blah, 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 you know what I mean? I also have another saying. I say oy vey a lot whenever there's technical difficulties. And I want to give a big shout out to one of our members. It's been an oy vey kind of day is my t-shirt that I have on. Thank you to Sherry Falls who got that for me. came this
That's
last week.
awesome.
She said, "Would you please wear this during the live?" And I said, "Absolutely, I will." So there we go. Oy vey every day.
Oy vey.
But yeah, when we see somebody like him, we go, "Oh, oy vey, oy vey." Let me pull this up here again. We'll get into these text messages, which are just absolutely, I mean, they're next level. So we have, hey, this is Pastor JP Miller. Solid Rock, right? I said Solid Rock. I got it right?
Yeah, you got this.
This is my new cell. I will not be giving this out to everyone. Please don't share it. You can always call the church, etc., etc. Can you please have Mica call me, or Charlotte, which I'm assuming is her sister? And she says, this is messages show Miller sent a text to Sierra saying he was on her way to the house where Mica was staying in November of 2022. We don't want any drama here. That was the pretense of Mica coming for a visit. It's just it's just Mica alone, 3 hours away. Matthew will not let, which I'm assuming is the husband, will not let you inside. We aren't doing none of that tonight. He goes, "That's fine. You can call the cops. Our dog can barely handle visitors as it is, let alone anything drama. I'm armed. I'm ready." Again, and you said you say how South Carolina leads the nation in spousal murders.
We have been at the top. Yes, I don't think we're there the past couple of years, but we're certainly 45, 46, 47th in the nation, and it's not the good end of that list.
I mean, is it? Here he is threatening. I'm armed and ready. I at least in California, I would be arrested before they'd be tracking me. There would be an all points bulletin out for me if I was to send something like that. Is this just common? Is this common in South Carolina in a way with, well, I can carry a gun. I'll do whatever I want.
We just passed open carry. Our legislature just passed open carry. If you're over the age of 18, that, anyone can have a gun in South Carolina. So I do think that the availability of guns and, without training people being able to have them and carry them is a step in the wrong direction, particularly sure. As a victims' rights attorney, as someone who's prosecuted, crimes where, these victims have been, harmed, they have been, abused, they have been murdered, and giving a weapon to an abuser is a very scary thing, and we certainly know that. A lot of times people think about abusers being in an other camp. They're not in, my neighborhood, not in my church, not in my kids' school, not anyone that's involved with my kids' baseball team, all of those things. But I tell people regularly, domestic violence and coercive control, emotional abuse, financial abuse, those things happen everywhere. There's not a neighborhood, demographic, group of people, educational status that it does not affect. It's everywhere. And we all have, whether we want to, believe it or not, we have interactions with people regularly who are affected by domestic violence. So I think part of the issue is that we continue to think that it's a them problem, not an us problem. And until we start to look at domestic violence as something that we all have a hand in and we all have to be involved in to stop, I think, these things will continue. So, again, I'm armed, I'm ready. That's incredibly bizarre, threatening. He's traveling there, letting someone know. To me, that is harassment. That's stalking. Yeah. It seems like some of these text messages lead me to believe, as a former prosecutor, that perhaps he could have and should have possibly been charged with something, weeks or days before this, Mica took her own life, because you have to show a pattern of behavior. This seems like a pattern of unwanted contact with her family. That's certainly harassment. So it's troubling. Now we're looking back and seeing this and looking at where what the result of not acting on this, what has happened, and Mica losing her life. And it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback after the fact, but I think that we have to take these things incredibly seriously. Law enforcement has to take these things seriously because these tragedies happen. This is, while this is an absolutely tragic situation, this is not an isolated incident. This happens daily all across our country. And we've got to address that.
My little dog, Muddy Soul, was just weighing in. This is her we have our AV club coming up this Sunday, and there she is. She's got her popcorn ready.
What a cutie.
She's ready. She's ready. She's ready to watch the Jinx season 2, part 1. But yes, this is a serious conversation, not to make light of it by showing my dog, but she was weighing in. But this is a serious conversation where I think, again, showing these patterns, but I feel like, and you're the expert here as a victim's rights attorney. How difficult is it to get law enforcement involved? Was there a history of her trying to have law enforcement involved in this scenario to try to get him to back off, or is it that he just didn't even care? Were there restraining orders filed, or does it help to do that? And what is that process like for your own clients even?
So in South Carolina, in order to get, when someone is married, you can get an order of protection if your life has been threatened, physically, or there's been threatened violence. You can also get a restraining order if you've been harassed or stalked. These are things that should be relatively easy for victims to get. However, they can be very difficult. One thing I always encourage folks that I work with is to keep good records, to make sure that you are reporting things to law enforcement. But not only that, if you've got, a Ring camera, if you've got, taking screenshots and emailing them to yourself so that you'll always have them in case someone has access to your cell phone, making sure that your privacy settings are, locked down on social media, taking your phone, to be checked by a professional, taking your car for it to be swept. There are important things that need to be done. And if you have, she had a tracker on her car, she did file a report, that's actionable. It should have been actionable at that point. Because you can see, while it was marital property, they were still married, the text messages show a pattern of behavior that was unwanted and was harassing and was threatening. And, for law enforcement to have not, acted on that, it can be very difficult. There are some law enforcement officers who certainly understand the cycle of domestic violence, understand how dangerous, we can go from a text message to an assault to a homicide very quickly. But there are others that, think that, well, these are just text messages. He has no active way to actually do this. Says that he's driving. He's not there yet. So it's not really a threat. To me, this is the foreshadowing of where we've ended up and where Mica, it's foreshadowing for her to end up dead here. And it's just tragic that we weren't able to stop it, that the system ultimately let her down. That's what it appears.
Yeah, I think that's the worst. That's the takeaway that I get from it, is that the system let her down, that she didn't feel safe enough, but again, was using social media to raise awareness. So hopefully this does not happen to someone else. Right. And I mean, very brave of her in retrospect.
Absolutely.
Just unfortunate all the way around. Again, some of these text messages here: I'm armed, I'm ready. Mica can fix all this. This doesn't help anything. Threats and intimidation only make matters worse. I don't care. Driving, can't text, thanks. If you come here, the cops will be here waiting. If you stay stay home, they don't need to be involved. You can't make a threat about being armed and come to my home in the middle of the night. That's not safe for anyone. involved. And he writes, fine by me. So again, he's warning her, that he's armed and ready and insisting that Mica can fix all of this. Then he goes into lamenting it. And it seems like there's and again, not to analyze anyone because I most certainly am not a psychologist, but there's just like the highs and the lows. All of this started because of one bad decision a month ago in Colombia. Now, I don't know if he's referring to her decision to finally leave it. Well, I guess this is 2022. So I believe this is maybe his marital indiscretion that he's referring to. All this started because of one bad decision a month ago in Colombia. Columbia's in South Carolina, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a couple hours away from the beach. Yeah.
If I could turn back time, I would. We had the greatest marriage in the world up until that one wrong choice. It can continue down that path, or we can have an amazing marriage once again. The choice is yours. Love you. If you come home today, we can take off the rest of the year and go to counseling every day, go to Iceland, do whatever in order to get well. I also desperately want a child with you. I'm scared of this. This is the only reason I wouldn't. I'm scared of divorce or putting the child through things like this, where you leave and aren't willing to do whatever it takes. So it says it says down here on the bottom, it is unclear what triggered the altercation, but messages show Miller is alluding to one particular bad incident that secured a month earlier. Again, this is courtesy of the Daily Mail, and this is another photograph. And I don't know what this is. Honey baby, my blood is on you, and my kids will know I couldn't take it without you. All you had to do was come home to me. So again, this is obviously an actual screenshot of the actual phone with the text messages, because apparently he had cut off her phone too. And then there's some colorful language. Try to get me arrested, every single piece of everything. Mica, now he's gone into this whole cycle of now he's going to throw everything in the back of the truck, ask her if she wants it. Two options, on the outskirts of your property or the trash and Goodwill. There is nothing left inside of the house that has any attachment to her. 20 large garbage bags full, and she can choose where she wants it. If she calls me, it is not at your place. If it's not at your place, it's gone. And then again, it flips again. If she comes home today, tell her I'm sorry. So sorry. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm sorry to you and Matt. I mean, it's this cycle up and down. Is this something that you see with the victims that you work with?
Absolutely. It takes on average victims and survivors at least 7 attempts to ultimately leave their abuser. So you can see the cycle here. You can see the up, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. We'll go to Iceland. I want to have a baby with you. And then you effing, starting, you're not doing what I want. So then they start threatening. I'm going to throw your stuff away. I'm going to destroy your life. I'm going to do all of these things. And then comes back down again. But I love you so much. You can avoid this. And they try to make it look like, they're manipulating the person that they are abusing, saying, you can stop, you can fix this. And of course, they don't want to be, the cycle to continue. It's so, the mental load for victims and survivors that have dealt with domestic violence is just tremendous. So putting it on the victim, like you're the one that can stop this, when ultimately the abuser is the one that can and should stop this, but they don't. So this is, it's textbook, domestic violence relationship text messages 101. Not surprising at all.
And then the threats of the extortion of going on social media, the defamatory nature of, and obviously I am sure he's weaponized, much like somebody would weaponize their social media, chorus of sycophants or followers or what have you. Right. He also probably has weaponized the church that he's the pastor of, I would imagine, as well. And I'm sure that she got many people that came to her and said, you can just work this out. You can just, everything will be okay. I mean, that seems to be a pretty common thing as well, involving others.
Yeah. And it looks like, just from some of the sermons that I've seen and, just in passing, He's weaponized the pulpit. He's weaponized the microphone in his church, the way that he's speaking about his wife, the way that he has blamed her, bringing up, their relationship, things about her, trying to tarnish her reputation with their church family. He's using every avenue that he can to try and control her. And it's really bizarre looking at that, thinking that there were people that were sitting there in that church listening to that and went back the next Sunday. Just very troubling to think about that, because it's, some of the things that he said are, it's again, textbook abusive dynamics, and in a public setting, making it look like, he's the savior. He's the positive one. He's the one who's taking care of her. He's the one that's doing all of these things. We haven't really brought up his allegations of her, a mental health, but, people who suffer from, an intellectual disability, mental health, or some sort of physical disability are vastly more likely to be in an abusive relationship, because the abuser uses that against the victim. So it's just an incredibly troubling situation, that he's used every avenue to really try to destroy her life. And ultimately, she took her own life. It's awful.
Yeah. And I'm somebody who's recently, discovered I'm neurodivergent, and I have a history of these types of relationships, and nothing like this, of course, but of being manipulated very easily. And it's a neurodivergent thing a lot of times. And, your empathy and it's one of those things. It's and then you feel attacked, and you feel like the world is closing in on you. Right. And I completely empathize with her and what she went through. I mean, obviously with a traumatic end. One thing we wanted to clarify too, a few of our listeners said that John Paul, her husband, had 5 children with another woman. Mica did not have any children, just to clarify. And I don't know if that wasn't clear from the text messages, because he's talking about telling his children. So that's children from another marriage. Seems like this guy has quite a sordid past.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, his father ran a school that's had some very troubling allegations that have been involved and been made about that school. The things that he said from that pulpit are incredibly bizarre. But it seems like it appears, at least from social media, that the church is rallying around, moving forward. And it's really difficult, because you see, if she was 15, as it looks like some of her discussions with her sister Sierra, saying that she was 15 when he began pursuing her in some way, grooming her, him being in that position of power and, having some sort of relationship with her. If those allegations are correct, that's happening right in front of the eyes of the entire church community. That's one of those things that it's an us problem. Domestic violence, abuse, it's an us problem. When we see these things, we have to call these things out. We have to try to stop them. And, it's really difficult when you've got someone who is in this position of, being he thinks a larger than life figure who's in control, in power, leading this large group of people, who thinks he's untouchable. And it's really difficult to do that, but those are the things that can save people's lives ultimately.
Yeah. And raising awareness and talking about this obviously is, again, the legacy that she leaves. There's a few more here I wanted to show. This is, so one of the other actions that this character did is he tried to get her, this is her, Mica's sister-in-law, Victoria. The unearthed text also unveiled Miller's threats to get Mica's sister-in-law, Victoria Francis, right, with Mica, obviously doing a little, what would that be, a little 1920s theme? Fired from her teaching position in February of 2024. So not only was he weaponizing Mica, and obviously his congregation, but then attacking people who who she was friends with and who she was close to, and going after their jobs and livelihoods as well to try to drag them in the mess. I guess this is coming from the academy. We really appreciate you as a teacher and fellow staff member. Lately, we have noticed some very ungodly and strife-filled social media posts from your household, from your husband's Facebook page. We also noticed that you wrote on an employee's Facebook page that he and his wife's page was hacked, knowing that they are in the process of healing. We greatly frown on actions like that, especially while we believe strongly in the ministry of reconciliation and restoration. We ask that you and your spouse please remove all social media posts that we are obviously referring to in this letter. This type of behavior is not tolerated and could jeopardize your employment, because he goes and makes this whole little stink. And I obviously they respond. Good afternoon, third and fourth grade parents. As you know, we have a biblical standards for our teachers. Unfortunately, after offering Miss Francis the chance to rise to these standards, she declined and was let go from the academy. And she was the principal. So again, creating chaos in her own personal life with friends to try to weaponize them against her. And there's Mica, photographs of her, and this is him, and we're going to play his video. Miller was seen breaking cover during a visit to his attorney's office last week in the wake of his wife's unalivement, which came just 48 hours after he was served with divorce papers. So I said separation papers. I meant divorce papers. Yeah. There's the church, the Solid Rock Church there in Myrtle Beach. And this is her social media posts, some stills from those where she is trying to raise awareness of what was going on. Mica Miller and Sister Sierra share a series of disturbing texts from her estranged husband during an altercation between the couple in 2022, which we played earlier. And this is his official statement, which was given to News Nation on Ashley Banfield's show a couple of nights ago. Credit to News Nation and Banfield for this. Our client refutes any report that suggests he ever abused his wife. Recent reports that claim that Pastor Miller was, quote, groomed his wife from the age of 10 years old couldn't be farther from the truth. That is from Russell Long, the attorney for John Paul Miller. And here we get into, this is the very bizarre, I guess you would say, eulogy that he was giving during her memorial service. Let's take a listen.
As Christians, of course, we know she's not here and in heaven, and she's worshiping and enjoying, and probably hadn't even had time to look down here yet. But I got this lay next to her body and spent time with her body about 4 times this week, and each time it still didn't hit me. I thought she was going to wake up. I even tried to raise her from the dead one time this week, and that morning, actually, I went to the mall later. She had bought me this dog tag, and the chain broke, so I went to the mall to get it fixed. And I saw a female about 20, 30 feet in front of me, and she was wearing one of Mica's dresses, and she had the same tattoo Mica has on her arm and the exact same hair. And out of just instinct, I screamed, "Mica!" And the girl turned around, and it was one of her sisters. And I thought I raised her from the dead. She's alive, But I can't wait to see her again one day.
Oh, courtesy of the New York Post. I don't know what I'm disturbed with more. Good to know that malls still exist in America. I didn't know they were a thing. You could just go down to the mall still.
Like people go to the mall? Okay. All right.
People still go to the mall, apparently. But raising her from the
away.
I'll show you the pictures.
Do you want to go to?
There's more of the video. There is again, raising her from the dead, spending all this time. It's almost like you can see it happening right there in real time, where he is grooming his congregation. Feel sorry for me. I'm the victim. She's left us. And I have the power to raise her from the dead. Now, I don't mean this to, I know a lot of people are people of faith, and I'm not trying to discredit that in any way, shape, or form. However, I do see people like this as being, a detriment to any faith that they participate in and claim to be a leader in versus an asset, in my opinion, because of their just godlike complex that they apparently have. But this has been circulating on social media, again, weaponizing his congregation. What do you think of this?
It's disgusting. I mean, I am a person of faith. I am a Christian, and that what he's describing is not the faith that I'm familiar with. The things that he said about his wife, the weaponizing the ability to forgive and reconcile, and weaponizing that against victims, true victims. And instead of supporting victims, we are attacking victims, telling them, that they need to forgive and reconcile with their abuser, is a tragic miscalculation that many people of faith use. I see it regularly, and it's dangerous. It is absolutely dangerous, because the only people that can stop abuse are abusers. Victims are not responsible for that, and so often we place the focus on the victim being able to stop the chaos, stop the madness. And the onus is not on them. It is on the offender. And we need to call that out. And what he's doing it's disgusting. It really, really is. And, for him to talk about, from knowing everything, he's told the congregation a week, 2 weeks, whenever that was previous, that she left, that she had mental health issues, all of this, talking so disparagingly against his own wife. And then to talk, about her in this eulogy, in this glowing way, and that he's the true victim. Even at that point, a lot of stuff had come out, that these text messages and things had come out, that people were aware of that. And he's still playing the victim. He's still playing that fiddle. And it's absolutely disgusting. And really, people need to be held accountable for ignoring the warning signs. I mean, there are a lot of warning signs here, that could have and should have stopped what happened from happening. And I keep saying it's tragic, but it absolutely is tragic. But these things, they can be preventable if we know what to do, if we know the resources that are out there. We know, ways that victims can be helped, because there are ways to get victims out of these relationships in a safe place, where they can be away from their abuser, and can hopefully thrive. But this is just awful, awful situation.
So when you were in the prosecutor's office, you said you were there for 8 years, correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Was most of your work geared towards going after offenders like this, like her husband, John Paul?
The majority of my caseload involved domestic violence and sexual assault cases, prosecuting homicides involving, marital relationships, crimes against women and children is where my focus was. And so the work that I do as a victims' rights attorney is really an extension of that, just working to represent the victim and protect their rights, make sure that they have the ability to get restraining orders, that they are meaningful when, an abuser is, stalking them, that we pursue every avenue to help make sure that they're held accountable, that law enforcement takes these things seriously. I look at what I do now as an extension of that. And as someone who's able to help victims and survivors navigate a system that was not designed with them in mind. It's designed from the defendants. It's very defendant centric. And the work that I do and other victims' rights attorneys do in South Carolina and across the nation is really trying to level that playing field so that victims have the ability to be protected, to make sure that courts, law enforcement, prosecutors, everyone involved is pursuing justice for them as well. Because these situations, these incidences that we see so often are, again, they're preventable. They are preventable. When we continue to, have abusers come in and they're charged with domestic violence, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and they get probation every time, or batterers treatment program where they go, to a class once a week for 6 months. That's not enough. It's not enough. Abuse is something that escalates. There's a pattern of behavior that abusers take, and it escalates. And if we don't stop it, then we see situations where victims think there's no way out, and they may choose to take their own life, or may choose to keep in that very dangerous situation, putting them and their children and their families at risk of imminent harm. And we've got to do a better job of taking these cases seriously, to be there for victims, because they don't deserve this.
Yeah, I mean, look, this has had a very tragic end, right? And but I think, if you're looking for silver linings, I think about, just even related to my own experience, or having friends that have dealt with these scenarios before, is, I say, well, thank God there weren't children involved. Thank God there's not a situation where now there's a child left with the abuser and reconciling the death of the parent that was abused. That's a really, really challenging road to navigate as a young child, because then you get this other, you then get the selective narrative of what happened, and what drove the other parent to do that, the
Right.
quote selfishness, or the slander that might come around with, oh, she had mental issues, et cetera, and then the narrative is created, and these children unfortunately never get the whole story, right? So I do feel fortunate in that. I mean, this is a massive tragedy, but it's a testament to her going out there and being very public with what she was going through, that these conversations are being ignited from, it's not a small town, but this isn't like a big city. This isn't a huge case. This isn't a Murdaugh, you know what I mean? Even though that is a low country, it became such a international case. This is something that's getting a lot of attention. As I said, I pulled some of these sources from the Daily Mail. UK is talking about this. That word is getting out there, and you see, even, there's a lot of scuttlebutt recently about a show on Netflix called Baby Reindeer, right? And
Right.
about the aggressiveness, and now discussing things of stalking and obsession. And I've had stalkers. I deal with this. I'm dealing with situations, and it gets very complicated, and because we're not having these conversations out there, but now we're starting to, where we're recognizing these behavioral patterns and starting to discuss how people can, in fact, protect themselves from these situations, whether they're female or male, and
Absolutely.
protect their families. If someone, like, not to hypothesize, but to hypothesize, if someone like Mica had come to you, what is it that you suggest as a course of action for them if they're feeling like there's no way out?
So one of the first things that we always do is we will go through safety planning with the victim, with our client. Our entire staff, we have victims' rights attorneys, but we also have certified victim advocates who are all trained into helping a victim figure out a safety plan. Sometimes that safety plan is not leaving immediately. Sometimes it is planning to do that. Sometimes it's getting out right then and there, getting them into a shelter, getting them into a hotel 5 towns away. There are lots of different things. But making sure that they are physically safe, that they and their family, their children are safe. If there are if law enforcement is already involved, it's something that we definitely jump right into, making sure there's some sort of protective order, there's a no contact order, and that it is upheld, making sure that any violation, law enforcement is involved in that, and that we pursue every avenue to keep victims safe and offenders held accountable. She was in the midst of a divorce here. There are motions that can be filed in the family court context that can protect her and protect, if she had any minor children or her family from being harassed, as looks like he certainly did. But there are, lots of resources that are out there, safe resources, shelters, avenues for victims to get out of these abusive relationships. And so often, sometimes people just want to call and say, what are my options? What can happen here? What can I do? But making sure that people know that they're not alone, that there are people who are out here who do this work, who can help them, who can, work with them, with law enforcement to keep them safe. That's what we do. And while, certainly this case has had a tragic end, I'm a glass half full kind of girl, despite the work that I do, because this case has brought so much attention, as you said, that people are having these conversations, that domestic violence, again, is not something that happens, in another town with other people. It's happening everywhere. It's happening in our churches. We can see that. We can see the signs that are there. And so I encourage people that are listening and watching, whether they're in South Carolina, the South Carolina Victim Assistance Network, we do work in this, but there are agencies and organizations in every state, all across the country. If anybody ever has any questions or anything, I'm always happy to be a resource to help people in similar situations to find what they need to keep themselves safe.
Because you offer that first step towards justice.
Absolutely. I try to. I try to. It's hard because there's situations where you think this makes no sense. Why is this so hard for victims? Why is it so hard for them to protect themselves? Why do we see that, law enforcement didn't do anything? And I'm not trying to, bust the balls of law enforcement here, but we just see so often that things are not taken as seriously as they could have been or should have been. And, knowledge is power. And sometimes people aren't ready to leave. As I said earlier, so often it takes years for them to leave an abusive relationship. But knowing the things that they can do, keeping a log of, whether it's financial abuse, coercive control, texting, the triangulation of, talking to this person and then talking to that person and trying to manipulate this,
splitting of information is a big one too, where they split things and weaponize. Yeah.
Absolutely. Especially, if they're separated, playing the children against each parent, things like that, parental alienation. There's so much that goes into this, and it's, it doesn't always follow the textbook there, but there's so much there that really, it's so important for us to pay attention to and to take seriously. Because it's a huge, huge issue. It's a huge, huge problem. And I'm grateful that, you're talking about this with your listeners, and, other people are talking about this, because this is not something people don't want to talk about this at dinner table. They don't want to talk about, coercive control, domestic violence, thinking, I'm in the grocery store and, there are people standing here in this line with me who are statistically victims of domestic violence. People don't want to think about that, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. And it's important to have these discussions. It really is.
I agree. And, you mentioned law enforcement and sort of law enforcement's responses to this. Is it because there's just a sort of maybe even an anachronistic way of looking at it for them, that they haven't caught up to the times? Maybe it's even technology. You mentioned earlier in the program the cyberbullying that occurs with students, and there's been a lot of cases that has come forward in the justice system in this country with cyberbullying and things of that nature. But this is showing, cyberbullying on a different, cyber DV, if you will, and
right.
And that control. Is it that law enforcement just needs to sort of catch up to the times, or is it that sometimes they just turn a blind eye, or they're just overwhelmed? What is that?
I think it's a combination of all those things. It is, not being trained on the latest, technology. People are able to, get on Google, get a phone number, and call and harass an individual. And there's, they think that there's no way to be able to trace that or track that. Well, there are certain things that law enforcement can do to be able to track that, be able to connect the dots, to get good evidence, to be able to show that pattern of abusive and harassing behavior. So I think it's, not being trained, being overwhelmed. The workload of law enforcement, prosecutors, our courts, it's overwhelming. I think that sometimes people are burnt out. These cases are difficult. They are hard, and you're dealing with victims day in and day out. It can be overwhelming. And I think for some people, it can become just normalized, but it's not normal. It's, something that I talk about with our staff and I think about regularly is that, when I work with a victim, when I work with a client, they're not just a client, they're a person. And what the story that they're sharing with me, their experiences, it's the most important thing that is going on in their life. And while I might meet with 4 different victims today, I want to give the respect and attention to each of those individuals because I want them to be able to get the resources they need, the assistance they need, and to help them do whatever it is that give them choice in a situation that choice is taken from them by abusers daily. So it is incredibly important for people who have been victims of domestic violence to have choice and to have autonomy, and we try to give that to them. And people burn out. I'm not using that as an excuse for law enforcement or for folks that do this work, but it's hard work. But I think that we have to recognize those things in our communities, in our fields. At our staff, we take a mental health afternoon. Every staff member takes a mental health afternoon every month. No questions asked. We cannot be there for our clients and for victims in South Carolina if we're not taking care of ourselves. Vicarious trauma is real, and it is something that we can't be there for others if we're not there for ourselves. So we try to model the behavior that we want for our victims and survivors that we work with. And I think, if we're not seeing that modeled behavior with, people who were doing this work, it can be very difficult. So I wish I had a better answer for you, and that was my lawyer long-winded answer of like, why is this happening? I don't know. It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of crap. But none of it's an excuse.
We do have some questions. First one would be, how would you recommend dealing with behavior, dealing with a person who has exhibited abusive behavior towards you? Should you confront them? Should you try to share your side of the story? How do they protect themselves?
When dealing with a true abuser, I never suggest, trying to get them to quote unquote see your side of the story, because they're not ever going to be focused on that. Making sure that you are protected and safe is your number one and only job. And sometimes that is pacifying them, saying, you're right, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have answered the phone like that, or whatever the situation may be, until you can get in a safe space. So I never suggest confronting an abuser, because so often that leads to escalation, that leads to threats of violence and actual violence. And so that is not something I ever encourage. There may be a time and a place for that down the road once there has been distance and you're safely extricated from that relationship, but that's definitely not something that I encourage. There are a number of domestic violence organizations that have suggestions and tips for people who are in abusive relationships, and I encourage you. I'll email you a few callers so you can share it with folks that are listening and that are watching, that you can take a look at, because number one, your safety is the priority. Getting your story out, letting other people, I tell people, let other people think whatever it is they want to think. As long as you are safe, that you're protected, that is the most important thing.
That's great. And one of our other members asked, law enforcement, I know this is really a question, more of a statement, law enforcement really does not like to go on DV calls because they are usually the most dangerous. I guess maybe we can phrase that as a question. Is that in fact the truth?
Absolutely. We've had very recently in Charlotte, North Carolina, just a couple hours away from where I live in South Carolina. Officers were going to serve a warrant and were shot and killed. It was a domestic violence situation that just escalated, and lives were tragically lost. So, domestic violence is unpredictable. You're going into a heated situation between two individuals. Oftentimes law enforcement, they don't know who's the aggressor and who's not. They don't know, they may know that someone called. It could have been a neighbor, but they don't know what sort of situation they're walking into. And they are incredibly dangerous situations. And so it can be very, very, very difficult for law enforcement to go in and ascertain what the heck is happening here, and how they can help diffuse that situation.
Yeah. It's it's just a tough situation. And yeah, but there's hope. There is hope, and you hold out
Absolutely.
hope for these conversations, the silver linings of these conversations being out there in the public. My guest today is Sarah A. Ford. She is a victims' rights attorney. You have a podcast.
I do.
And
Yeah.
what is that
Stepping
podcast?
towards.
Where can our listeners find you?
So you can find me all on social media. I'm Sarah A. Ford, ESQ, on Twitter, on Instagram, all over. But you can also follow me at Step Toward Justice, where we tackle issues that we're talking about now, different cases, victim advocates, working with law enforcement. What do sane nurses do? People who work with victims of sexual assault, what can you expect? How can we help? How can we as a community be there for those that need us most? And those are the conversations we have over on my podcast.
And important conversations they are. Thank you so much. This is one last question here. Cat Loves Catskills wants to know, have you ever been threatened by an abuser that you have prosecuted?
Yes. I'll tell you, 2 days ago, I've been out of the prosecution game for
2 days ago. Okay.
2 days ago. I've been out of the prosecution. I've been legal director at South Carolina Victim Assistance Network since 2017. And I got a friend request on Facebook from someone that I prosecuted for domestic violence who went to prison 2 days ago. So, yeah, I have. Oops. I lost you. I couldn't hear you. I don't know what happened.
Oh, that's because I muted myself because I was trying to.
Well, you looked. I was like, oh, I don't know what he's saying, but it's going to be so good.
This happens a lot, just so you know. That's why I have the oy vey every day.
Oy vey.
All day. It's an oy vey moment for sure. Some of my fans have wanted to turn this into a drinking game, but as someone who quit drinking alcohol 4 years ago now, I think that's a bad habit to promote. And also I'm worried about how drunk people actually would get because it happens so often that I might just,
happens.
It might be a little too much. If occasionally I'd be like, take a shot, but not at the rate that it seems to happen on this show sometimes. But that is wow, that is absolutely. And here they are saying you're muted. Thank you so much. That's wild that they would. Again, you talk about the boundaries and they don't know the boundaries, or they don't care, and it's this sort of godlike syndrome. I just hope that having these conversations, makes people a little, we don't make people hyper vigilant, but at least situationally aware of what's going on out there, and also what their rights are. Most importantly, I think that a lot of people, people that I've interviewed in the past, people that I've had conversations, myself included, sometimes don't understand what their rights are. They think that they feel that the deck is stacked against them, that they don't have as many rights as the person who's trying to victimize them. And what do you say to people like that?
I always want people to know that your rights, you have rights, constitutional rights, federal rights, that are there to protect victims and witnesses, people who are involved in the process. And, I think about kids, they're on the playground and kids know defendants' rights. They know you have the right to remain silent. If anything you say can, kids play that, policeman and, cops and robbers on the playground. We know all the defendants' rights, but no one's thinking about, victims having the right to an attorney, a victim having the right to have access to, materials in their case file, being able to be present and be heard by the court before a bond hearing or at a guilty plea, being able to participate. People are not thinking about those rights. The right to be free from harassment, intimidation. That's a constitutional right in South Carolina for victims. That's a big deal. And you can assert those rights. There are, agencies like ours and others that can help victims and support victims in asserting those rights. The area of victims' rights enforcement and victims' rights law is relatively fresh. It's relatively new. But it's something that we've got to talk about, that we've got to pursue, that we've got to put into our, cultural consciousness. Just the way that defendants' rights, kids know those on the playground. We've got to let people know that they have these rights, that they can assert these rights, they can be protected, and make sure that, everyone who's involved in the system, from, law enforcement to prosecutors, judges, to, neighbors, friends, the support system, we're all working together to support victims and survivors, because they absolutely need us. And that's the way us all coming together is how we stop, this victimization from happening. And, these conversations are not super fun. They're not super, uplifting. But for me, if there's one person that heard some of what we talked about, Collier, here today, and they're like, okay, absolutely. That's winning. Like that's important. That is winning. And that is, there may be somebody who's listening who may say, well, heck, what are the victims' rights in my state? And they know somebody who's going through the criminal justice process and feels out of control. And I say, hey, let's Google that. That's a win. That's huge. So I really appreciate you having me on and talking about this, because, these are not the things that people want to talk about at parties, but they're things that we do need to discuss and things that we do need to draw attention to. So thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for joining the program. My guest today is Sarah A. Ford. She is a victims' rights attorney, and she is the host of the Stepping Towards Justice podcast. Sarah, thank you so much for joining the program.
Thanks, Collier. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you. That was quite a conversation, Mover Nation. Big thank you to Sarah for joining the program and her very busy schedule. But again, these conversations, and this is my takeaway from all of this, whether you are going through these types of scenarios, whether you have a friend, relative, or just want to reach out to someone who is troubled by these things you see it on social media, don't hesitate to take action. Don't hesitate to take care of yourself and your own mental health. I've seen this play out far too many times in my own personal life, where people don't take stock of that and don't look after themselves. So please, as Sarah suggested, reach out, find resources, find friends. You are not alone in this, and this is what this program is all about, is sharing this information with you guys. Please, if you are a channel member or you are a Patreon supporter, do not forget our live Collier's AV Club. I think this is our third episode of Collier's AV Club. We were watching the first episode of the second season, The Jinx, this Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Please join us for that. Mover Nation, we get through another one. Here's the outro. Mover Nation, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to all my channel members and Patreon supporters. And for more exclusive content, behind the scenes videos, monthly VIP meet and greets, and watch parties, please consider supporting me on Patreon or by becoming a YouTube channel member. If you like this video, check out this one right here or this one right here. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because it helps with the algorithm. On that note, I'm Collier Landry. I'll see you on the next one. Good girl, Marisol. Good girl.